you start the live streaming, please? Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Management Licensing Committee. Before we get going, I'll just ask us to go round and introduce ourselves, starting with Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Neil Jory. I am the elected member for Milton Ford Ward.
Councillor Tony Leach, Oakhampton North.
Jeff Moody, Tavistock North.
Alistair Killiam, Buckland Monacorum Ward.
Steve Guthrie, Drew Stainton Ward.
Caroline Mott, Bridistow Ward.
Sam Wakeham, Hatherley Ward.
Jacqueline Houselander, Head of Development Management for West Devon.
Catherine Borough, Legal Advisor to the DM Committee.
Rich Edel, Chair of the Committee and Ward Member for Buckland Monacorum.
Jerry Southcott, Bridistow Ward.
Catherine Hall, Democratic Services Officer for West Devon.
Thank you. There are no apologies for absence. We're all here. Declarations of interest. Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to declare a interest in agenda item 7A on the agenda today, as I'm a member of the Town Council, which is the owner of the land where the tree is located. And while I have not predetermined the application, I recognise that my role creates a perceived conflict of interest, and in accordance with the Council's Code of Conduct, I will take no part in the discussion or vote on the item.
Thank you very much. Any other declarations of interest? No, thank you. Item 4, items of urgent business, there are none. Item 5, confirmation of the minutes of the 15th of April. Are you all content that the minutes represent the meeting? Thank you very much. I'll take that as yes. Item 6, the legal statement. There's no requirement for a legal statement because we're not dealing with a specific planning issue. Okay, that brings us to item 7, which is the planning matter before us today. And I will just get to it. It is 007225 TPO. I'll read it out just so we know exactly what we're talking about. There are 2 trees we're discussing today. T1, which is a copper beech, pruning branches by approximately 1 metre on east side and clear telecom supply lines to prevent damage and permit more light into the property. And T2, which is a lime tree, the application is to fell and remove it, planted too close to the boundary with the cemetery, out of reach, overhang into property, completely blocks out the sky, creates an enormous amount of work during leaf drop and blocks gutters and drains. It's unusual for us to have a TPO come forward to this committee, so I'll just ask the Senior Planning Officer to explain why this one has come to us.
Thank you, Chair. So this application, it's not an application actually, this TPO has come before us because it's an application which our tree specialist is partially happy with and partially not happy with, and also because the ward members are part of the Town Council, and the tree is actually owned by the Town Council, so it was felt appropriate that the application come before the committee on that basis. Thank you.
No further ado. Sorry. With no further ado, I'll ask the tree officer to give us his report. We've then got a speaker and a statement that will be read out by Mrs. Hall. But we'll deal with that after we've had the officer's report. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, members. As described, the application through. Oh, sorry, there's a delay. So bear with me while I get back. So it's application reference 0072 25/TPO 121 Plymouth Road, Tavistock. I'm sure you're familiar with the site, but I will just, for purposes, we've created this with T1 indicated there to the, it's kind of like to the, slightly to the west of the property. The word stone, that's maybe an old milestone within a large group of trees and shrubbery, I don't know, but the word stone, disregard, that's just on the mapping. And aerial photography, again, it just shows the location roughly amongst trees that are present. So hopefully that fixes everybody's bearings as to the location of the tree to the side emerging from the New Road Cemetery. I have a few images of the tree just to set context. This was taken in April this year, so the leaves were beginning to emerge, not at full size yet, but the purpose of this picture is just to show the context and the relationship. So the applicant's rear garden, if you like, is to the left of the property. So this, the tree overhangs, the element of it that overhangs it is over their driveway, and it's to the west and to, if you like, over the front driveway and their garden. You'll notice the close-clipped laurel hedge that forms the curtilage, and the grass and the burials there, and this tree on the western elevation. Taken from Plymouth Road, this was this weekend. As you can see, the leaves now are their full size, so it does have a denser crown, and I chose to put this in just to offer balance. Some of my earlier pictures made the tree look smaller, but when the leaves on, I do appreciate it looks bigger, so it felt unfair to use them. So again, you can see it rising to the west. There's, what I would point out is the, I should perhaps put an arrow, but the tree, the larger tree on the right, is the Copper Beech T1, where there are minor works proposed, which I raise no objection to. They're very sensible works, in my opinion. To the left, the tree, the tallest one, that's an English elm tree. It's quite unusual to see an English elm tree. It's getting to a nice size, but possibly it's got Dutch elm disease, I don't know. And further down the road, if you like, over and above the car, that's more trees within the cemetery. So trees to the left, to the right of the property. This is the description of works we had in front of us. It was read out, but for clarity, I'll just go again. T1, Copper Beech. Pruning branches by approximately 1 metre on the east side, so that's the side facing the property, just to give some breathing space between the tree and the property, and to clear the phone line, if you like, to prevent damage, to stop the branches rubbing and affecting signal, which of course is sensible works, and that would have the combined benefit of allowing light into the property. And for clarity, I do wish to support them works. T2 lime tree, fell and removed. The description and the reasons for the works as we received was it is planted too close to the boundary, it's out of reach, overhang onto property, so possibly that meant branches couldn't be lopped from the floor, possibly, completely blocks out the sky, creates an enormous amount of work during leaf drop, and blocks gutters and drains, as we had it described. And as Jacqueline said, the reason I sought delegation, let me make sure I get my words right, to offer a decision of refusal with lesser works. Now, it gets even more, so it's a split decision offering refusal with lesser works. I wanted to allow the works, as described, to T1 Beech, which I felt and continue to feel are reasonable, but then allow lesser works of obviously not felling the lime tree. Because there's been objection, I reached out for delegation, and quite rightly they raised their hands and said, we are as ward members, are also town councillors, and it wouldn't, clearly not, it would be unfair, as Mr Moody correctly did, to offer a view, and so here I am seeking the view of the committee. The key issues, as I believe, are spelled out. T1, Copper Beech. Now this tree is owned by Devon County Council. It's one of the avenue, if you like, of County Council beech trees. It is protected by TPO and always has been. Again, this is the works I want to support. T2 at the time of the application was protected by the Tavistock Conservation Area and owned by the Town Council. So the nature of a conservation area just is time limited, as with all notices, such as listed buildings. We had 6 weeks to review it, meet, seek negotiation, offer compromise. If within that period or by the end of that period, we haven't reached compromise, we only have 2 options. We either effectively, in default, raise no objections and the tree could be felled, or alternatively, as has happened here, we served a provisional tree preservation order, so we could just continue the conversation, if you like. And here I am. T1 supported, obviously. So a meeting was held in January earlier this year with myself, the applicant, the owner of 121, and the clerk of works for the town council, Becky Rowe, and we considered and listened to the points made, and reviewed the importance, or as I felt, importance of T1 as in the setting of the churchyard. And I felt there would be a harm to amenity, so I felt the public would, both mourners within the churchyard and pedestrians, neighbours, users of the Tavistock Road, the Plymouth Road, would feel a visual harm by the removal of T1, so T2. So and with the town council's support during the meeting, tabled a compromise of lifting the lower canopy of the tree, if you like, to about 3.5 metres, which would, in my opinion, allow a little bit of natural light in earlier in the morning and maybe later in the evening, and reducing the side back to the middle of what I believe is a party hedge. It's a close clipped laurel hedge, just to strike a balance between the concerns of the applicant and retaining the tree as an amenity for the wider public and the visitors to in the churchyard. I followed this up and spelled that out in an email later that day, and after consideration by the applicant, the offer was refused, which is fine. It's always here for an open book conversation. So obviously I want to now issue the split decision, and as described, it was called in. So called in by Jacqueline. There's the key issues. I've made an attempt here to annotate a bit of a drawing, just because members who haven't had the benefit, so maybe they could understand. If you look on the left-hand side, my proposal would be to reduce that side where the applicant felt there was an excessive overhang leading to the problems described by 1.5 to 2 metres, which would be, in terms of tree health and what the public would perceive, but they probably wouldn't notice. I felt it may alleviate some concerns. And then to lift the lower canopy height to the 3.5 metres above ground level. Again, just to maybe give some separation from the hedge, allow early lighting. Now, this won't stop shading. The property is surrounded by lots of other trees, so it won't stop shading and it won't stop leaf fall. It would reduce it, and I just felt, in terms of my duty to have regard to trees and the responsibilities of protecting amenity, particularly within the conservation area and in the setting of the listed building and the churchyard, I sought a compromise, and roughly, and I hope that makes it a little bit clearer. So we had the reasons for the felling in the tree work application, but also within a communication received within the lifetime of the notification, within other elements of that email conversation, if you like, I identified that the applicant had raised further points which, to make sure we was completely open book and transparent, I have also regarded as duly made representations. So this is taken, I hope I haven't paraphrased. So the tree is a rogue planted by a previous grounds manager, and where relations were poor possibly between the landowner and the town council. I believe relations are good now. I have no knowledge of this, but what I do know is it's I think it's probably the only tree on that curtilage where mourners who are visiting them stones, their loved ones, it's the only one that breaks the massing of the residential property, along the whole of the curtilage, I think trees were removed in living memory where there was a big bank of trees, and its loss would actually, I feel, would just leave now as quite a harsh, squared off edge to what would normally be a more soft, naturalistic edge to a churchyard, is my opinion. Matters of leaf fall were recapped, sap fall, and the risk concerns about risk were introduced. So again, it's a fact I can't escape. There are many other trees, mature trees. It's a well-treed cemetery. We have the trees on Plymouth Road, either side of the property, and they obviously are of great public and ecological benefit. So we can't escape the fact that leaf fall will continue. Hopefully my compromise may have alleviated some direct, on a quiet day, the issues that blow down, but on a windy day, they'd come from everywhere. And there is case law about, there is an expectation that matters of tree debris will be regarded as normal part of living amongst mature trees in a town. It's part of living in nature. In terms of the risk, this is a small tree at the moment, but perhaps what was considered as the risk as it grew. I can categorically say from my dealings with the town council over the 8 years, they take their duties very seriously. So they have two duties. Duties under the Occupiers Liability Act 1957 and 1984, and the various health and safety responsibilities, and they do undertake their periodic tree inspections to a good level of diligence. I always commend them on it. So I believe that will be handled. If there are excessive leaf falls, again, it may come elsewhere, but these gutter guards and proprietary guards and grills and you can put them in the gutter runs themselves to prevent leaf fall. I appreciate they don't answer all problems, but it is a property surrounded by trees. I believe the applicant felt we were setting aside a number of regulations. Maybe I read that as stepping out of procedure. So I'm very, very careful in my duties, and I always take counsel with Jack and my colleagues. And the reason the TPO was served is I was stepping through the process, but then as immediately I saw these additional items, I've brought them in just so I'm trying to be as open book and transparent for the committee as possible there. The relevant possible policies, I could read them, but I would get tongue-tied, but we do have, supported by policies, obviously, either the central government legislation or the West Devon JRP, which touches upon relationship with heritage assets, which I believe this tree has. Some discussion, without trying to read it verbatim, which is always boring. It is it's my view, that the felling would lead to a ready appreciable, and I say current and future, and I do split the words out carefully. Current, there would be a hole, there would be no tree there, clearly, but it would also, if it's a lime tree, could live to 150 years, 200 if it's going to be managed, if it outgrows its location. So we're looking at many human lifespans who would enjoy that, and visitors to the churchyard for whatever reason. I'm trying to protect that esoteric element of the future of the tree. It is a feature that I believe aids in the character and appearance of the conservation area, just as much as the features on the lovely chapels and that within the grounds is a feature of benefit. And it does come with some issues as spelled out by the applicant, but I'm trying to balance it here against the benefit of the public and the issues concerned, and trying to find that middle ground. Again, I've talked about the sense of enclosure and tranquility for mourners. I feel would be degraded by the loss of this tree. And in my opinion, and I'm sure it wouldn't be welcome, I would have more trees planted along that elevation. But that's for the town council to decide, but I always encourage tree planting. Again, my compromise sought to address the concerns of the applicant whilst retaining overall tree shape. And I mean overall tree shape, I'm not saying that if it grew to its final size of maybe 60, 70 foot, it might not need some crown diminishing works. This does happen, but I believe it's got time to space to grow vertically with some pruning away from the applicant's property and minding its own business into the churchyard. So its amenity benefits can increase to an extent without unduly affecting the reasonable enjoyment of the property. As I said, there are trees surrounding, other than on the long elevation with the churchyard, of much larger size, and don't think their T2 would grow to any larger than a beech tree, which there's some very large ones in the location. And this is a point to take note of. It's planted to the west of the front garden and driveway. It's not planted to the south of someone's rear garden, which obviously we would be very mindful of. This was overhanging someone's only primary amenity space where we would expect them to want to enjoy their gardens. It does cast shade and there will be leaf fall, but it's over a front garden where people wouldn't be expected to be taking the sun, having their coffee in the evening, whatever they choose to do. So, and then if you think it's sat below much larger trees, and a copper beech tree is a densely canopied tree, so that is well regarded and well known to be one of the ones that casts the most shade, and they are much taller and above it and between it and the path of the sun. So I don't believe it is a big issue on the shade front. So to my recommendation, I will read it verbatim because I want to issue a split decision allowing the works to T1, which is the copper beech, and refusal of the felling of T2, but allowing lesser works to it of a crown lift to that from ground level 3.5 metres, combined with a lateral, so a side reduction on the southeastern aspect which faces the applicant's property. And I read that, and this is what I tabled during the meeting, to be in the middle of the party laurel hedge, which because it's quite a wide hedge actually, they do grow wide, but I found a middle ground. I want to propose a couple of conditions it's a standard one I apply, but it just controls the standard of work so that works aren't done to a standard that would cause the tree to have poor health or poor imbalanced regrowth. And the second controls the size and length of branches to be cut in terms of diameter and the actual length from the cut point, just to get to the centre line of the hole and to make sure it's not cut to too high. And I don't go out and measure branches, but it's meant to just control it within the spirit of what I hope can be agreed. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, have you got questions for the tree officer? And if you have, could you be clear whether you're talking about T1 or T2? Councillor Leach.
T2. Should the work be carried out that you're recommending, do you think in time it will alter the symmetry and the balance of the final tree?
Probably, yes. And that is a fact I've wrestled with. But considering the wider amenity where people enjoy its height and the aspect into the churchyard, but with an understanding that the concerns of the resident, I tried to find the middle ground. And it's often a balancing exercise, Councillor, and my ideal is we don't live near trees and they can grow into a nice shape. So it's a fair point, but I do accept that, but feel it wouldn't be to an extent that would prevent the public enjoyment or undermine the effect of the TPO.
Councillor Mott.
Thank you. Following on then from T2, as it is a lime tree, my understanding is as they mature, they often benefit from pollarding. This would have to be done under another application though, should the Town Council wish to do this?
That's entirely correct, yeah, where a lime tree can outgrow its location, but they are, so I believe the wider churchyard is a Victorian derived, and that's when it was laid out. This is a lime tree in a Victorian setting, and that's a very typical tree to be planted. There is an acceptance when they get to a size that outgrows their location, they can be pollarded. And that is one of the beauties of lime trees. They're very, very tolerant of it from young age, probably a bit early at the moment, but towards middle age onwards, there's many avenues of fine lime trees which do benefit the relationship between neighbours and keeping it in the churchyard.
And of course a huge resource to the insects and bees in particular.
Yeah, very much so, yeah, in terms of climate change and adaptation. It's one of the trees we would favour. We are running out of trees that aren't affected by diseases at the moment. There's many diseases, none on lime, so I don't add extra weight, but I've got one eye on that. I would always carry through my appraisals based on what's in front of me, but it is a tree species that isn't affected or listed for removal by the Forestry Commission.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Guthrie.
Thank you. Just a brief one for the tree officer. If these works are going to be done to the specification that you require, is that going to have to be compliant with a arboriculturist doing the work?
The first condition, the one requiring it to do in accordance with British Standard 3998, would lead it to that. But I know the Town Council, if the Town Council do undertake the works, do use qualified arborists. If the works, and this is without prejudice comment, were undertaken, if the committee agrees, by the applicant, again, the British Standard 3998 does control quality of works, and if it's done poorly by the tree surgeon, we would have redress.
Thanks very much.
Okay, we're all done on questions for the tree officer. Thank you very much. We have one registered speaker, Mr. Graham Coker. If you'd like to come up to the table, Ms. Hall will show you what to do. Okay, Mr. Coker, I don't know if you've been speaking to the committee before, but you have 3 minutes to make your case from pressing the button on the machine. And when you're ready, off you go.
Okay, thank you very much, Council, for letting me come in. Given the conflict that exists with this problem, I'd like to invite the Council to actually view the tree in real time, so that you get a three-dimensional view and a good global view of it, because the pictures really do not do the situation any justice. The lime tree was planted by a former member of Tavistock Town Council without management knowledge or permission, and there are no records that support the lime tree being there, and I actually had to issue a Freedom of Information request to prove that. The tree is planted far too close to my boundary with the cemetery, and there's a distance of around 2 metres. Now, I believe it is a lime tilia, and those trees can grow to a height of maximum 45 metres, with a spread of 50% of its height. I have submitted a scale drawing to the council to confirm size relevance to the property, but I haven't seen any associated reference to that. The tree is located in the only sky space that we had on that elevation when we come out from our front door, and that is now being completely blocked and overwhelmed by the tree. We've had that space for more than 20 years, and it actually contravenes the Right to Light Act of 1959 for trees, and that is my legal right over neighbours' trees. The legislation that protects property owners from losing natural light, particularly due to new constructions or growing vegetations like a neighbour's tree, bush, or large plants like bamboo. I think that's fairly clear. Lime attracts aphids such as greenfly and blackfly, and we have additional bird excrement upon our vehicles. We clear that space, especially because we are in the presence of the copper beech, and the birds obviously use that tree a lot. So we cleared that space specifically to park our vehicles, and then we've got the same problem again. On completion of the planning applications consultation periods, I discovered that not one single objection was made. And this sort of tells me that the local community haven't really too much concern about the amenity that this tree offers the cemetery. This corner of the cemetery is also it's an entanglement of trees. It's mismanaged, and I think it's an eyesore, to be honest. So all this talk about it being a focal point of the cemetery, I think is nonsense. And we even have a fir tree ready to shed another branch. I think it looks awful. In conclusion, I think this tree is to be legalised vandalism, supported by a view and opinion of the tree officer and his report versus those against mine, and we live next door to it. I asked the council, do you really think this is all fair and acceptable? All I did was ask for the tree to be removed, and the exact opposite has happened. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Members of the committee, have you got any questions you want to ask Mr. Coker? Councillor Jury.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting to hear from your perspective. I think we can understand the difficulties and problems that the tree is providing you with at the moment, particularly where you park your vehicles and so on, which you've, I think, adequately explained. Could you enlighten me a little about why you think the compromise that's been suggested by the tree officer would not help that situation? Because it does seem as though a compromise has been put forward, which might meet some of the problems.
The compromise is not an honest deal. It's for a duration of 10 years only, and within that 10 years, there are only 3 times that that tree will be trimmed back. I've already asked the cemetery to trim it back, and they've not even bothered to reply. In fact, they refuse to communicate with me, so it's not a successful arrangement. Furthermore, in order to have that works done, the tree officer has informed me that planning permission will have to be sought. So once again, and I've already put planning permission in to get this far, I don't want to be doing that again in my retirement years, and the tree doesn't even belong to me. So a planning permission or planning application to go in requires a yes or no answer. And if I get a no, then that tree is going to grow even more. So I'm not happy with that. Not all the branches will be cut back either, only those of a certain diameter, and I think that includes the bark diameter as well. And that's it, yeah.
Yeah, any other questions from members of the committee to Mr. Coker? Okay, thanks, Mr. Coker. Thank you very much. We've now got a statement which Mrs. Hall will read out from Tavistock Town Council. Thank you.
Following consultation with the local planning authority, Tavistock Town Council sought measures to protect a lime tree in Plymouth Road Cemetery following a third-party request for its removal. For context, there has been a history of individual trees within the cemetery being poisoned, as well as damage to the hedgerows in and adjacent to the land under the ownership of the Town Council. The lime tree was originally planted through consultation with West Devon Borough Council in recognition of damage caused by a third party to a hedgerow within that section of the cemetery. The Tilia species was chosen due to its historic presence in parks and churchyards, as well as due to its value in terms of biodiversity. The Town Council believe the lime tree makes a significant contribution to the amenity of this area. The planting of the lime tree within Plymouth Road Cemetery complements the existing treescape, whilst providing essential succession to the Victorian planting when the cemetery was first opened in 1884, and forms part of the Council's strategy for tree planting and management. The lime tree is a young, well-formed, vibrant specimen of the Tilia species, and as such bears high potential to not only enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area, but also significantly benefit the environment for a considerable time span. The Town Council recognises their role in protecting the landscape and supports such nationwide government-led tree canopy initiatives, which includes preserving existing tree stock and allowing natural growth. The Town Council does not believe the lime tree materially impacts negatively on properties outside of the cemetery. In contrary, trees with high amenity value generally provide a positive impact on neighbouring properties due to the aesthetic appeal and environmental benefits such as increased oxygen, wildlife habitats, and cooling effects through the shade they can provide.
Thank you very much. Well, that was a statement. We're not able to sort of ask questions against that, but thank you very much for that. So we're now in, we've had questions, we're now in discussion. Anyone wish to make any points before we move a recommendation and vote on it? Councillor Mott.
Sorry, Chair, it's a question. I'm just looking down through on page 15 of the agenda. I believe the officer said that works to tree 2 was not only a crown lift, but works to one side of the tree. And I don't believe that's reflected within condition 3 of the proposal under number 16 at the bottom of page 15.
I'm not quite sure where you're looking.
So it's where it says on the bottom of page 15, condition 3 is consent granted for crown lift to achieve a maximum clearance of 3.5 metres between ground level and the lowest part of the tree's crown. This clearance is to be achieved solely by the removal of branches measuring no more. But I believe in your presentation you said about works to the side of the tree as well?
Yeah, I can answer that. That condition 3 just specifically deals with the crown lifting element, as I proposed at that time. I think looking at condition 2, it's explicit in 2, the branch reductions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no,
I just wanted to check. Thank you.
You had my heart in my mouth then, briefly. We're all...
Mine.
Thank you.
Any other points of discussion?
Thank you, Chair. My apologies. No. If we're into debate now, Chair, I'm more than happy to support the officer's recommendation. I feel they are very reasonable and measured given the trees' locations.
Thank you. Councillor Jerry.
Thank you. It seems to me that this is a significant tree and that it does provide a certain amount of benefit, and I think it does sit well in the landscape as it stands at the moment. I think I'd agree with my colleague that the compromise works that have been put forward by the officers seem to me to be very reasonable, and I'd be prepared to support that split option.
Anyone else want to make a point before we go to vote? Councillor Guthrie?
I would just like to say the same. What appears to be reasonable.
Could I ask the tree officer just to put up on the screen the recommendation? Just to be clear about what we're voting on, that's the recommendation. So I move the recommendation of the tree officer for the recommendations as written up there. Can I have a seconder for that? Happy to second, Chair. Thank you. So all those in favour of supporting the tree officer's recommendation, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Chair.
Indeed, noting Councillor Moody abstain. Right, thank you very much. We now move on to item 8, the agenda, which is the planning appeals update.
Sorry, Steve. Okay. So, members, this is there are 4 appeals to talk about today. I can find my notes. But the middle 2 have been considered by the inspector as one, in that they're on the same site and very similar issues. So there are actually only 3 presentations, if you like. The first appeal was for a certificate of lawfulness at Selden Farm, Moncote, Campton, Winkley. The application was for a certificate to establish that a timber shed and a garden area had been used as ancillary accommodation for a period of 10 years or more. You can see the site. This is Selden Farmhouse. Just over here. Oops, sorry. Just over here. And there's the timber shed, and the red line indicates the area which has been used as garden for the ancillary shed. This is what the timber shed stroke lodge looks like. In terms of floor plan, you can see there's a lounge area, a fire, kitchen, and a mezzanine bedroom and ladder, but it is occupied in association with the host dwelling, which is the farmhouse. Clearly, as you can see, there's no toilet facilities here, so they would have to use it. The toilet facilities from the main farmhouse. The application was refused because the officer felt that the information that had been submitted as evidence, so that's things like statements of fact, were conflicting, and there was a concern that that potentially it hadn't been used as ancillary accommodation to the host dwelling. It was an interesting appeal decision because it talks about the planning unit and what that means. In this case, the inspector felt that the planning unit was the farm and the farmhouse, and that this was part of that planning unit and not a separate planning unit. The officer was concerned that it had been being used as a separate residential unit, but the inspector didn't agree. The inspector didn't agree and felt that that it was actually being used. It was being used as ancillary and had been so for the period of 10 years that's now required by law. It's worth a read if you're interested, just on the basis of it discussing what a planning unit is, because there are situations that we get quite often where there's an application for another building on a farm to be used for different purposes, but he was very clear that this was an ancillary building. The people that are now occupying it are family members who work on the farm, and he was convinced that therefore the certificate should be granted. Quite an interesting one.
Can I ask, in association with that, does that decision now give the owners, if I can put it that way, permission to continue using it as accommodation, as if they had put in an ordinary planning application and that planning application had been approved?
So yes, they can continue to live in it as ancillary accommodation.
Thank you.
Yeah. But it makes it immune from enforcement action. That's the effect of the certificate. The next 2 applications, excuse me, sorry. The next 2 applications are at Horethorne Farm, North Loo. These come on, off the back of a Class Q approval for some conversions to agricultural buildings. There's 2 schemes. That's one for 2 dwellings, and looks like, and then this one shows the 3 dwellings on the adjoining site. The Class Q approval gave permission for 5 dwellings, so converting the agricultural buildings to 5. But when a Class Q fallback, that we describe it as, comes to committee, it's very much on the basis of So a Class Q isn't considered against the development plan, it's considered against the regulations in the permitted development order. When a refresh application comes in for the same development, if you like, but actually building new dwellings, it's considered against all of the policies within the joint local plan and national guidance. So in this case, the officer had several reasons for refusal. They didn't see that there was an essential need for the dwellings in this location because it's a countryside location. And also that it failed to respond to housing need. It's interesting, inspectors sometimes go with that policy and sometimes don't, but in this case, they went with our considerations on the basis that these are 5 very big detached dwellings with big gardens, whereas the barn conversion would have constrained the development to be within the building itself, and so were smaller, and we didn't have an opportunity to consider them against our policies, obviously, because it's a Class Q. He felt that the design of the dwellings as well wasn't in keeping with the layout of the existing buildings on the farm. So there's sort of a, not awkward, but if you look at the buildings that are already there, they're a little bit haphazard, if you like, whereas this development was looking incredibly suburban and completely out of character with the area. The other reasons were that there was a potential for overlooking on the 2 sites. He wasn't as concerned about that, but he did feel that there was a potential for it. He didn't feel, we also recommended refusal on the basis of policy Dev 32 in terms of not providing sufficient information about carbon reduction measures, but he felt that that could be dealt with by a condition, so he didn't agree with us with that on that basis, but he did agree with the other reasons for refusal, so those 2 appeals were dismissed. As you can see, the design isn't really necessarily in keeping with a countryside location. The final one is appeal for the milking parlour, High Wilmstone Farm. There's been lots of developments on this site, lots of planning history. There was a previous refusal and dismissed appeal in 2021. The application was to replace, it was for a replacement dwelling, so you can't really see that very well, but the site is up here, an area of grass associated with this dwelling here. Where again, it was recommended for refusal on the basis of there was no essential need and it was a countryside location. Also, there were no Dev 32 provisions, so no carbon reduction provisions, and it was also within the Tamar EMS, which requires a financial contribution to be paid for any new residential development, and they didn't submit that with the application, although I think they did submit an undertaking at the appeal stage, but the inspector wasn't happy to take it because he didn't feel it was sufficient to deal with the mitigation. So it was another interesting decision in that one of the reasons for refusal was also about housing need, and it reinforcing the fact that Tavistock as a an area with a wider parish have something like 47% dwellings which are under-occupied. So they've got a lot of larger dwellings, if you like, which are under-occupied. And these dwellings would just add to that because they were all 3 or 4 bedroomed. Actually, the need in Tavistock is for smaller units. And so he went into quite a lot of detail about that in the decision. So it's quite helpful. And again, he talked about the very suburban character, wasn't impressed with how they'd been designed in this location. So again, that appeal was dismissed. And that's all the appeals. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions on those? Councillor Guthrie.
On those, the North Loo one and the one you've just discussed, the milking parlour, did they use agents?
Oh, I don't know. Yes. I know that the Higher Wilmston one did. I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect they would have done, just by the design.
It's always very interesting what agents seem to be offering their clients.
Okay, no more questions on that. We'll move to agenda item 9, which is the undetermined major applications. And again, these have been updated in red, and we'll pick them out by exception, any that anyone particularly wants to talk about.
Just to let you know that the old woolen mill at North Taunton, the applicant off his own back submitted a whole raft of additional information, and Stephen, who's dealing with it, felt obliged, I suppose, to re-advertise it. It's now been re-advertised. It will have a 21-day consultation period, and a report will then be written up. I have said I don't want this to go on any longer. The last set of re-advertisements, there were still quite a lot of technical objections, drainage, the heritage officer was unhappy. So, yeah, I am hoping, well, not hoping, it will be the case that we will have it to bring it to the next available committee after the consultation period has ended.
Thank you. It'll be nice to lose an old friend. Councillor Ewins, sorry, I didn't spot your hand up.
It's all right. I'd just like to say, it's, as Catherine knows, it's only been on the list for 22 years, so it's not long really, is it, in the grand scheme of things?
We'll be losing a long-lost friend.
I think we
Let's
will,
hope we
but
do.
it's finally done.
Any others?
Tony.
Councillor Leach.
Front door, guns, yards. I see it long past land registry issues been about, but the 106 still to be signed. So will that now be signed now that ownership sorted out?
So the ownership hasn't been as sorted out as we had anticipated it would be. There was going to be some submission of some additional information to indicate that the ownership was with the land registry, and the last time I spoke to David, it hadn't been submitted. So my proposal with that one is to bring it back to committee, because it's been such a long time, and we are looking to bring in, I know it was something that David raised when he did the Plymouth Road report about how we dealt with appeals, and he said we need to be, and I agree with him, so where appeals are not progressing at all, we need to bring them back to committee within after 6 months, because if they're not progressing and it's down to the applicant, they're just sitting on it, and therefore we need to be reassessing whether or not the application should be approved. So from now on in, I would propose that we bring ones like this back to committee, and also it might actually prompt the applicant to actually do something about it. So, yeah.
Any others? Just before we close the committee, I was remiss at item 5, when we approved the minutes of the last meeting, not to also approve the minutes of the licensing subcommittees that met on the 18th of March and the 22nd of April. Are you happy to approve those minutes? Thank you. That, I think, concludes the formal part of the Management Committee. Can we stop the live stream, please?